All right, I'm Sam Wright. I've been the host announcer for the AMA Expo, but it's my privilege and honor now to introduce Bob Brown, the president of the AMA. And let's give him a warm welcome. Bob?
Thanks, folks. You know, it's somewhat ironic. About 90 days ago, maybe a little bit longer, we heard that the FAA had selected Hoot Gibson as the new representative that we'd be working with. And Rich and I looked, and holy cow, that's our Hoot Gibson. Hoot Gibson has been up here on the stage numerous years. He's an astronaut, definitely the ambassador for the Academy. And it didn't take us long to find out that the Hoot Gibson that we're now working with wasn't the same Hoot. And, you know, I guess it's been kind of interesting. Hoot Gibson is right behind me. I've found in the few hours that I've been together with him, he's very, very interested at helping the Academy, helping aero modelers, very interested in model aviation. As I say, he's a former jet jockey, a graduate from the U.S. Air Force Academy. Pretty good guy so far. All I can say is, being honest, and in our discussion, Hoot's saying, well, what should I say? And I said, all you have to do is get up there and be honest. And I think the majority of you will appreciate what he has to say. Enough of my words. Hoot Gibson, please.
Thanks, Bob. Kind words. Okay, so we've established I'm the good Hoot Gibson. There's a lot of them out there that get me in trouble. I want to thank Bob, and I want to thank Rich. I want to thank AMA for the opportunity to come talk to you today. And frankly, for me to come out and listen and have an opportunity to learn a little bit about your community, a little bit more about your community and what you do. We know there's some ongoing challenges. I'll touch on it in my briefing. This is a very fundamental change in aviation that we all are trying to get our arms around. Anyway, as the slide says here, and I'm going to try to master this as best I can, I will get through my talking part in probably 20 minutes or so, maybe 25, depending, and then hopefully the rest of the time will be for Q&A with you all. So I can, again, listen and hopefully answer some of your questions. As it says up here, I'm the senior advisor to the deputy administrator, Mr. Whitaker, Mike Whitaker, and I've had that job since September. The job is new. It's created for me, almost, you might say, as is another UAS position, and I'll touch on that here briefly. Again, glad to be here with you today. Bob touched on it, my background, and I'll get to that. Some new positions in the FAA focused on the UAS change in integration efforts. I'll talk about a little bit of, from my position, some of the changes that we're introducing, some of the initial efforts we're taking to accommodate that, and within the headquarters specifically. I'll talk about, again, how fundamental this is, and then we'll get to any hot topics, if we have any. Okay, so 2 new positions. Some of you may or may not have known Jim Williams. My hat's off to him every time I speak. I look in the audience to see if he's out there. He's done a lot of good work. Jim was a friend for the last 4 years or so, and as part of his retirement and the struggles that he had, I think he went back up to the headquarters and to the administrator and said, you know, there need to be some changes to empower the change that's needed in the UAS integration efforts. And 2 of them are the director. He established the director of the integration office. I talked to EAA earlier. Most of you know Earl Lawrence. He comes from that background. And then also, as he entered the FAA, was the director of the small aircraft cert in Kansas City. So he knows the FAA very well. He knows the business very well. And he's new director, which is an elevated position from what it used to be, the director of UAS Integration. He works in AVS under Peggy Gilligan, But his shop is getting bigger, and again, he's now an SES, and we're hoping that that helps him integrate the efforts. My position, the senior advisor, is new, and basically, I'll talk about my background, but coming from the Air Force, I tell everybody I used to be the chief dart thrower at the FAA, and now I'm on the team, but they hired me anyway. And so what I try to do is get with the administrator and the deputy, and frankly, the senior staff, and look at what we've been doing. Again, Earl and I both entered on September 21st, and so we're going into our 4th month of working back in DC and in the headquarters and trying to outline where we think we need to go. Some initial efforts. First of all, when I met with Mike Whitaker, the deputy, we talked about the way we are currently organized. I think we can all safely say that our hats off to the FAA for what they've been doing the last 6 or 7 decades. We all put our family and friends and kids on airplanes, and we don't even think twice about them making it safely to their destination. It is a global standard that they've established in safe operations and in transportation, air transportation. But UAS, which I described as probably the greatest revolution in our aviation in our lifetimes, has really brought some curveballs and some unusual thoughts because it is so fundamental. And so I got with the deputy administrator and the administrator, and so we're doing a complete review of how we're organized, all of our processes that we've established long over time, and whether those will support the safe innovation and integration of UAS as we move forward or not, and what changes we might recommend. We're in that process now. As you can imagine, it's we're making sausage, so it's a little bit of a challenge. A lot of folks believe, and rightfully so, the way we do things, and we do have a public trust of safety being paramount. But yet, as we all know, there's innovation, there's global leadership, there's economics involved here as well. And trying to strike that balance is a real challenge. And so we're finding our way, as many are. The other piece that I'm personally working on, but I'll broaden it out to the Pathfinder efforts. There's currently 4 Pathfinder efforts that are ongoing in the R&D area. Okay. Most of you know about the small UAS rule, which we hope to have out here by late spring, and that's to cover a majority of visual line of sight operations for folks 400 feet below, and that'll take care of a big part of the business that we're involved in right now with exemptions for commercial operations and such, which, by the way, we just passed 3,000 exemptions accepted. The downside of that is the same folks that are doing that work are also trying to get the small rule out. So we've had to strike a balance there as well. But there's other areas that we thought, and coming back to Jim Williams, this Pathfinder idea, that we could push the science, if you will, and technology in several areas that we knew was going to be the growth pattern. And rather than wait until trying to boil the ocean, we thought it was important to push ahead in these areas. Beyond visual line of sight, all of us are aware that that's kind of the holy grail. That's where we're really going to see true commercialization and opportunities for business and safe operations. BNSF came to the FAA, and in all cases, the Pathfinders are funded by the companies that come in and make the proposal. BNSF came in to offer a look at beyond visual line of sight inspection of their rail lines, and we're in the process of that. They've had their first flights. We know the beyond visual line of sight, either through rail, pipelines, power lines, is a huge safety and economical boon to the industry if we can get that going soonest. So BNSF has started flying inspection of their rails on their nickel, but working very closely with us on that. Another Pathfinder is being sponsored, if you will. CNN came forward. It's kind of media, but what it's really is to find a way to safely operate over large groupings of folks and do it safely, which would be their scenario, if you will. And so they're engaged in that right now. Some of the technology you can imagine is parachutes and things of that nature, but they're exploring it with their technologists that they have and that they've contracted, and we're watching them as well. A third Pathfinder is sponsored, if you will, and Precision Hawk. They came forward, and it's extended visual line of sight. Most would say this is kind of in the arena of agriculture, where you kind of know your farm, you know the surroundings, so you're able to extend a little bit beyond it and still surveil what you're doing, but yet deconflict it from any known aircraft that might be coming over. And so they're exploring that and how to do that safely with probably geofencing and other technologies being introduced as well as we go along. We know agriculture is anxious, quite anxious to get going in this area. It's, for those of you that don't know, it's an impressive capability when you fold in all the sensors that are out there today. The last Pathfinder is one that I'm currently involved in. The AUS office, or the integration office, came. My background, again, Air Force, fighter guy, commander, but also quite a bit of time over in the desert. So I'm familiar with airfields and protecting them and detecting what's around. And so I'm pulling together this last Pathfinder. CACI came to us, CACI, and had some technology. There's a number of folks that do on being able to detect these quadcopters and UAS that are operating in and around airports. We think usually unwittingly, but we need to be able to know that they're there and then take appropriate measures. Some have called it counter UAS. From a previous life in the Air Force, I would say we're not in the counter business. We're in the detect and mitigate. And mitigation will be anything from apprehend to something else, and most of that will fall to DHS. So we're partnering with them, and as soon as we get through this initial effort, which will probably be completed in the spring, they will probably be out in front in many cases on their application. The last thing that I'm currently involved in, and again, I've been on the floor for about 90 days, is something called the XCOM, or the Executive Committee. This involves the interagency. It came out in NDAA language in 2009. I mentioned to others today that about 2007, when I was still over in the Pentagon, that I started touching base with the FAA. We were quickly outstripping our ability to pilot all those vehicles, and knew that this was not a fad, this was the way of the future. And we started to partner with the FAA even then, kind of hoping to give them a heads up. As I tell everybody in my interview, in today's language, though, how ironical that I'm now back on the 10th floor when I was a chief dart thrower for so long. But here we are. And so the executive committee was stood up really between the FAA and DOD to begin integrating DOD and acquiring that knowledge. Before they even had their first meeting, though, they decided that they had to have DHS, CBP at the time, Customs Border Patrol, who were operating UAVs, and also NASA, because of all the research that they do, obviously. And so that was a pretty powerful team. I'm trying to revitalize that again on the interagency, and we are looking, because of today's issues with DOJ, we just talked about detect and mitigate and the capabilities required there, but also Department of Interior. I'm sure all of you have seen the concerns about wildfire fighting and whatnot, and so we need to bring their concerns into the interagency as well. So that's just some of the work that I've lined up, besides coming to speak to you today and being involved in the way ahead organizationally. I'm going to step through these very quickly, and we'll come back. Again, this is for those of you, and I assume everybody here just about loves aviation, or aviation enthusiasts. Let me just ask real quickly, I told them I might do this. How many of you out here have a traditional aviation background, have been certified either now or in the past in traditional aviation? Okay, that's good. I at one point called it a clash of cultures. I think that's maybe a little bit too harsh. But this fundamental change, besides the way we aviate, through links and command and control systems, and you have the ground control station through a link architecture to an unmanned system, is not the way we traditionally have operated aircraft. But also the tradition in traditional aviation of safety, accountability, certification, those of us that have come up through that, now meshing with this almost IT innovative group that doesn't come from that aviation, and we're trying to find a way to mold those together into one safe operation in our national airspace. And I think we're on a good way towards that path. One of them, of course, is registration, and I know that's going to be a hot issue with everybody, but we'll come back to that. So a very fundamental change, as I mentioned. The FAA has done us very well up to this point in traditional aviation and the safety standards that they've set and been able to complete. But as we get into this, old methods and old processes may or may not be able to get us through safe innovation in a timely manner to enable some of our technologists and technologies. I've met with several folks, and I'll get through this here eventually. One more. There we go. For those of you here today, frankly, that are involved in AMA, and I had a chance to speak with some folks earlier today, I think leadership from those from the long community of aviation and what it involves, the privilege of flying, I would say, we need to have them in the field and on this issue expressing and providing leadership so that we can safely accommodate this new capability and new group. And so there's been several folks of my ilk and my era, you might say, that have had a conversation on this, and it's an older term, but it's one that I still think is going to be important as we move through the next several years, and that's folks who are involved in aviation and have been for some time expressing leadership in this environment. Last thing is, as I stand before you, I know the FAA is a regulatory environment or the group, and they have in many ways the final say. I think the fact that most of you have heard about the registration task force, and I'll come back to that, we work closer now with industry than we ever have. For those of you who are familiar with NASA and what they're doing in the UTM realm and others, they're out in Silicon Valley and they are partnered very closely with industry. I think in a previous life, the flash to bang, but the point from this technology and getting it fielded and then having it change and adapt already again is very compressed to what we in the traditional realm have had to deal with. So as we look out there, I will tell you the leadership in the FAA, in the halls of the FAA, realize we don't have all the answers. Not even close. So we are looking for that close partnership with industry, academia, organizations such as yourself here with AMA to get this integration accomplished that we all seek. And I think that the way we'll get there is as a community, aviation community. So I would ask you all to be on board with that today. All right, let's see. Let me go back. This was my failed attempt at humor, hot topics, but we know there's at least one, and I'll come back to it here momentarily. So without further ado, I think we're ready to entertain some Q&A. I do have some slides up here on the registration, so when we come to that, I'll be happy to throw those up and talk to you about it. Do you want to point them out? There he is right there.
Hi, Hoot. How are you?
Good.
The FAA has traditionally unregulated several aspects of aviation, MARSA being the big one I'm sure you're familiar with. The thing that strikes me most about the current registration scheme is, let's say I go to the ultralight field in San Diego. I can fly an ultralight, a man-carrying airplane that's capable of several, almost 100 miles an hour and can weigh up to 500 pounds. And that aircraft is not registered in any way. If I go to the same field and fly a model of the ultralight I just got out of, that aircraft has to now be regulated. Can you explain how that makes any kind of sense at all?
Well, popular question, obviously. I'm not necessarily the expert yet on that, but I can tell you the line of thought that generated this registration effort. At first of all, let's step back. The FAA has the statutory authority to compel people to register their aircraft. The way we've done it for years, frankly, is paper and carbon copies and whatnot, but it's been out there for a long, long time. Initially, it was elected not to be exercised in the case of the small UAS aircraft that we're talking about that has become the current registration effort. We started hearing about a number of near misses and impact or potential damage that this could cause, a safety risk to manned flight, besides folks on the ground as well. And it was thought with the growth numbers that were projected, by the way, in 2015 it was thought was about 300,000, and again, the FAA is not in this business, but industry has passed these numbers, and that there'd be another 400,000 probably introduced over this holiday season that we just passed. So there's 700,000. The numbers have continued to increase. I know we take exception, folks take exceptions with a number of those sightings, but in any case you look at it, the order of magnitude of sales and the trend is continuing higher. It was thought to now become a safety concern and issue. Registration in and of itself, as we know, I mean, it's not like a tractor beam or something, and we know folks that might have nefarious things in mind or not care about it. That won't solve that problem. But our view was, and others' view was, again, it's flying is a privilege. We've always had a tradition of accountability. And so the thought was this would give us an opportunity to educate those folks, because we thought the majority of people that are having these problems flying around airfields and whatnot are kind of doing it, frankly, from ignorance. You know, I tell everybody they just wanted to go fly their kite. Unfortunately, their kite can really create a real hazard to manned flight and to other folks operating in the NAS. So this was an opportunity to get folks registered and give us support back to them from an education standpoint, and we thought that would drive a lot of compliance just by the education. So that's the history, if you will, on the registration. And I can't speak to the ultralights or the other right now, but I can take that question if you'd like me to.
One of the things you said in your speech was, I'm over here.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm not armed. One of the things you said is the FAA had the final word. That's not true. Congress has the final word. Congress has already put 336 for those of us that fly line of sight. FAA, in our opinion, has way overstepped. You're swatting a fly with a howitzer. The guys that have been flying line of sight are not the ones that are doing the things that are getting everybody's attention. The guys that are in this room, obviously you're talking to the choir, these are all AMA members in the room mostly. So we're and the other problem I have with that is I'm answering to Congress for line of sight. I fly line of sight. If I want to do a quad or a tricopter or something like that, or if I want to fly commercially, then yeah, I'll go to the FAA. But if I'm flying as a hobbyist, Congress has already said this is how it is. FAA's come in and they've already come out and said in an LEO to the local enforcement agencies, they must be registered and they have to show it or you take action. So there's not a lot of openness going on right now. This is here it is, and too bad, how sad. I'm afraid that's how it looks to us. But I think it's overstepping and it's really unfortunate. The last thing, I have not registered yet, and I'm really, I would like to register, but if FAA is not going to keep my privacy, that's standard business across the entire United States. I mean, I get less privacy, I get more privacy protection if I come in as a illegal alien, for God's sake.
Okay. Not nearly as emotional as I thought we were going to get today, but no, let me address your question. And let me step back, I guess. I tried to explain the registration. 336 says no new laws or regulations, basically. And the point of the FAA is it's pre-existing. We already had the statutory authority to compel registration of aircraft. UAS are now called and termed aircraft. It was discretionary that we didn't before this, but now with the numbers that we're seeing and the incidents, we figured it was only going to continue to grow. So the idea of accountability and giving us support back to educate the masses, frankly, that haven't come up through the aviation community. So that's kind of the rationale. We can talk afterwards if you want to about whether it's a sledgehammer or not. But that was the idea, especially kind of forced into some time constraint because holidays were approaching and there was going to be another 400,000 out there, and it was timely to try to get it done. It's also why we were able to do it rather quickly, because it was a pre-existing capability. And if what was the second part? Just yell it out. Privacy. Sorry, yeah, it's not good that I would forget that. My understanding is that the database is not searchable. It will not be searchable except by serial number, and we will follow. They're still working through the IT piece of this, but essentially it'll be searchable to law enforcement as you would do in any other activity. It's not going to be open to the public to find folks. So it will be protected in that sense.
Great. Well, thank you for your reply. Excuse me. I had a question based on the FAA is standing tall on the aircraft registration. Mm-hmm. When you go on, what's really happening is it's a pilot registration. It's a pilot registration when you can put the same number on all the aircraft, and the aircrafts themselves are not inspected or certified. So along with that, the follow-up then becomes is that we already have a community-based pilot registration system in effect. Why can't we integrate that into this and, for lack of a better term, use our AMA numbers?
Yeah, you mean AMA.
Exactly.
Okay. There's ongoing stuff that we're working with AMA, and Rich and Bob are well familiar with that. Back to your initial point, though, this registration, the hobbyists, if you will, perceived was... So you or me? That was me. Okay. Was really for... so it was registered to the individual, because the thought is you're going to build these, and so you'll go through a number of aircraft. So it was the person, not the vehicle. Now, commercial operations, we assume that they'll have fleets, right? They're going to be out there operating in dozens or even more. Those will be individually registered to the airframe. So that is different. Back to your point about AMA. I and the FAA are well aware and sympathetic in some cases to the traditions that you have in AMA, the safety record, the accountability, your guidelines. And we're going to continue to work with AMA on how to possibly down the road be able to port this in. The point is, though, that's going to take some time, okay? If nothing else, just from an IT standpoint. I'm not going to tell you not to put your AMA number in the aircraft, but the difference is it's not a registration. So you guys obviously do that so that you can find your vehicle, know who has it, so on and so forth. And that's still standing. What we're asking is for the registration. Most of you know that it's still free up for the next however many days, 19 Jan. I was afraid I'd get this question, so I did it last night. For me, I don't own one. But it literally did take just a couple minutes, okay? It's pretty straightforward. I know folks are concerned about the credit card. There's email. There's a way. That was really offered as a way to validate that you are who you are, say you are. But that money that $5 will be refunded to you within 7 to 10 days, within the 30-day window, and then you're good for 3 years. So I was at CES in Vegas last couple days, and somebody pointed out, and he said, I don't have one, but I might want one in the next couple of years. I'm going to do this while it's free, and then I'm good. Whenever I decide I want to buy 1 or 2 or 3 of these things. So there is that. But so we continue to encourage the organization and the individuals to register, take advantage of this free window while we have it, and certainly the folks that own these vehicles before December 21st have until February 19th to complete, until the 20th through the 19th to register. But the free period is got a couple weeks to go. But I can walk through the screenshots. We captured them. I have them up here, and we can. I certainly can answer the question, but I can tell you, hands-on. I did it last night in my hotel room. It's very straightforward. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Did we get away from the? There you are.
Yeah, I think I got far enough away. Actually, I have 2 quick points. First, relative to the registration. During that process, a screen comes up that you have to agree to certain guidelines. The first one says, I will fly below 400 feet. In your view, or FAA's view, does that set a limit of 400 feet? And you actually mentioned 400 feet earlier. That concerns many of us in the modeling community because we've been safely operating above that altitude with no conflicts with manned aircraft. So is it your view now that this is an implied 400-foot altitude cap that will become at some point a regulatory point? The second point I had was with respect to the logic of saying the 336 prevents new regulation but allows current regulations. By that same logic, does it not open model aviation up to regulation for everything in Part 91 that is currently in existence? Because the logic seems to be the same. You're saying you can impose registration because it's pre-existing. Well, all of Part 91 is pre-existing, so are we not therefore potentially open to the imposition of all of 91?
Well, let's start with that. First of all, I can't speculate on the future. I'm not an expert on Part 91. I understand your concern. I don't think it's the kind of thing that I've heard discussed at all. But I'm happy to come back. Let's come back to the 400-foot issue. I just became aware of that, frankly, about 3 or 4 days ago. I had a telcon from Vegas back to the headquarters, and it's in review and discussion right now. In fact, it came up in this morning's meeting in another venue, and just before I walked up here, I sent another email back, reference the 400-foot page, if you will, that's in the web page. I don't know that there's going to be any significant change, but I know it's being discussed right now. When I said this is a very fundamental change, and I said we're going to get there as a community, that's what we're going to have to do. There's some areas and some thoughts that have not been crossed yet and continue to arise and generate discussion, and I invite everyone here to be part of that discussion as part of that aviation community. Okay? Yeah. Here? Whoop, sorry. We'll get you next. Okay.
Yes, sir. My name is Jim Campbell. I'm with the Aero News Network. I've been documenting follow-ups and messes with the FAA for 30 years. So I have a hard time looking at what's being proposed and not seeing serious problems. One, many of the task force recommendations were virtually ignored. Two,
Such as?
well, talk to the task force people right now that are basically saying that the consensus that the FAA is claiming is not what has occurred. They did not want to see a registration process like this. Two, the Administrative Procedures Act and all administrative procedures are currently what the FAA uses to enforce actions against pilots and operators. Due process is out the window. Hearsay evidence is admissible. There's a lot of problems with it that even the Pilot's Bill of Rights 1 and the proposed Pilot's Bill of Rights 2 do not correct. We can't get the FAA to actually define just what due process rights are going to be available under enforcement actions that may be occurring. And when you're dealing with hearsay and everything else all at the same time, and as the guy who wrote the book on the FAA versus Bob Hoover case, I can tell you it's a nightmare. And then finally, how do you ignore 100 years of model aviation history with statistically no significant accident history or involvement in the NAS of any really negative connotation, and all of a sudden decide to regulate an entire species of aircraft?
Okay, I guess we'll start somewhere. Go ahead. I don't know that, first of all, your second question, I'm not sure. You know, I can speculate on how things are going to be enforced or not enforced, Pilot's Bill of Rights. The task force, let's begin there. The task force was a large, diverse group of folks represented that, to include Dave Voss from Google, who was the co-chair, okay? Rich, I hope you don't mind me pointing you out. He was a member of that task force from this organization. And like most things coming from a diverse background, not everything was acceptable to everyone, okay? It was a consensus view. Not everybody got everything. I think Dave Voss used the term, it was a package deal. So some got what they wanted, some had to give on a couple other things. I was not in the room. Earl Lawrence from our side chaired that. But it was understood that as it went forward. The only thing that I've heard, and I just sat next to Brendan Schulman, who was on the committee or the task force, and he works for DGI. The only thing I've heard is a $5 fee, and they finally got it down to, can you just put a penny in and come back? And it was found that wasn't really in compliance with congressional direction of, you know, you have to collect the money. So anyway, so I guess I agree to differ on whether they all felt like they were sold a bill of goods here. I think The task force members that I've heard speak publicly and otherwise have all said it was the best we could do, and we're excited for that process to go forward, working with industry. So you and I will agree to disagree, I guess, on that. The second part, like I said, I'm not sure I can speculate and really capture that one. And the last part, ignore 100 years of tradition and all that. I wouldn't use the term ignore. I don't think we've ignored it all. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met with these gentlemen today if I was ignoring it, okay? Or if the FAA was ignoring it. So as I mentioned, this is a fundamental change. It's new, and we're trying to do smartly, to proceed smartly with providing safety to all of us here that operate in the NAS, both manned and unmanned. And this is as far as the process has gotten us thus far. We, I think, honor the work that's been done by AMA over the years, and hopefully we'll continue to work closely with the FAA as we go forward.
We've been AMA family for 30 years. We have 3 sons. We have a lot of rockets, drones, RC aircraft. They're shared among the family. So how do we go about registering those? Does each person have to register every single drone under their name? Or as a family, can you register?
Well,
As a trust?
I can give you what I think's the answer, which is we just said, as long as we have a responsible person above the age of 13, in this case, registered to those aircraft. If you choose to do it individually, you can do that. I can get you a more detailed answer subsequent to this. Okay, I know that's not the last of the questions or statements. We'll come back. Yeah, we'll come back to this gentleman and then that gentleman over there.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just got a better view, I think, up here.
I'm glad to hear about your commitment to privacy of the registered flyers here. I think it would be a really good idea if the FAA would put that commitment in writing on the registration page and make a lot more people comfortable to commit to that. Moving on, though, the commitment to privacy, the FAA has already set an example of the 333 exemptions being public, being searchable. I don't know the I don't know the reason for that, but my concern is the new plan, the 107 plan. Are you going to do the same with 107 and make that public to be searchable from the internet so the public can find out all the private information out there? Who owns an Inspire, who owns a Phantom? That's a huge concern.
Okay. The 333s are commercial entities, typically, that come in and submit those, not hobbyists. It was designed for that. And, I can't speak for fact that I've reviewed them. I know 333s in many cases were published so that folks that wanted to complete the process could have examples out there to see what kind of information was successful and what wasn't, and what follow-up questions were there, so that they could expedite their own application. So that's a little different than saying, we opened it up for whatever. So commercial entity, a lot of that was vetted and put back out so that the folks wanting to complete the process would have a model to follow, if you will. I'm sorry, I already forgot your last part. Oh, the 107. Well, the 107 is going to be a rule, basically. So it's not registration per se. It's saying that if you're below 55 pounds and you can meet these criteria, day VMC, altitude restriction, safe, not careless and reckless, and those kind of things. A lot of it's pretty common. That's just going to be out there. That's why it will free the hand of many of the folks that right now are doing exemptions. So we're really excited about getting the rule out there, because that'll reduce that workload significantly, and we think enable a lot of operations right now that would be beneficial to commercial and private entities. It's a rule. It's a law. Yeah, I mean, it's a statutory rule. So there's no personal identification assigned to it. It just simply says, here's the rule. If you comply with that, you can go operate.
Mr. Gibson, thank you very much for being here today. I have a couple of what I consider very serious concerns. The registration in and of itself is an annoyance. Is it government overreach? Problematic. The issue really is you cannot guarantee the safety of anyone's information. Ask Eric Snowden. Secondly, we register our crafts, our hobbies, whatever they might be. Let's take a little mental field trip across the country to Washington, D.C. The SFRA. That has shut down model aviation entirely in the D.C. area. 30 fields. One of those fields is control line only. Please address that.
Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Can we guarantee a cyber threat? Probably not. Do we all? How many in here have driver's license and provide information to your state and locality? Okay. Back to the part about the CIFRA, though. Let's move on to this special flight restriction area. I think I mentioned in my previous life, I was actually in Cheyenne Mountain during 9/11, and all the follow-up, I was director of operations, the first director of operations for Northcom. So defense of the capital region, set up, Avenger Systems, bowling, other stuff, I'm very familiar with, and was at the middle of a lot of that. So when I have a friend who's also retired and flies in the area, a retired general officer, he sent me an email immediately. He said, "Did you know this is going on?" Date that a few weeks. Rich and I had a chance to have that conversation, and I promised to look into it. Very briefly, yes, that is a current existing restriction. Part of the logic is UAS or aircraft. If you're going to operate within here, you have to squawk and talk, and of course they're not going to be able to do that. So this is a security work team, if you will, or group that comes up with these recommendations. It's not just the FAA, it's Capitol Police, it's FBI, it's Secret Service, a number of folks. And so this came up, and so the FAA felt compelled to adhere to that, and that's where we stand now. Discussions are ongoing about how to maybe try to reduce or reintroduce that under waiver so that we can get back to the operations that you talked about. But there is no promise. It's, again, a work group. We're only one voice in there, but we have raised the issue, and we'll see where we end up. Yes?
Hello. My question has to do with the 333 exemption and the commercial use of UAVs. Could you speak a little bit about some of the overburden requirements that people have to go through just for flying for commercial reasons? And my example would be simply taking pictures of real estate for, my wife's a real estate agent. If I want to do that, I'm required to have a pilot's license, traditional pilot license. And just to be flying around the house, it seems to be overburdened. Can you address any changes that might be coming down the road in the future with that?
Well, again, I think in the 107 rule, when it comes out, it's going to have some relief in the private pilot. There's some other standards, operators, basically basic tests that you take that says you understand the basics, and that will comply. The commercial piece, really, everything that's hobby is hobby, and everything else is commercial in some respect. I would say among this group that essentially it's tied to revenue. If you're revenue generating or supporting revenue generation, then that's a commercial operation. Commercials looked at differently than hobbyists. Hobbyists and the rest of you kind of impact yourself. There's this public trust that people get on things that are commercial or supported for commercial, then it has to meet a little bit higher standard, right? I mean, we all remember the barnstorming days, and you could get on, and maybe you lived, maybe you didn't. Those services now, if they're provided, have to meet a standard that the FAA is involved in. Coming back to that, so that's an example where I think there'll be some relief, but it's still, if it's a commercial operation, that's why we tend to draw that line. Yes? Well, again, I can't stand before you and speculate with all the changes, but those kinds of things are being discussed. The question was just that, if you're just flying around to take video of your home or as part of your real estate industry, I know that's a common one that comes up. Don't understand why you have to have a private pilot license and the rest of it. And I mentioned that I think that will evolve over the next 4 to 6 months. Okay.
Yeah, over here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So, you said earlier this is a revolution in the industry, and I completely agree that the ability to fly autonomously has really just exploded over the last probably 6 years and so forth. I would actually argue that that level of innovation that's happening here in the United States and helping the United States to be competitive in agriculture, et cetera, is a direct result of the hobby activities that some of us have enjoyed for 30, 40 years. I've personally instructed about 50 kids how to fly. I'm the regular instructor at our field, and we teach these people to operate safely in the national airspace. The first thing we teach is see and avoid. And so for the problem I see is there's a fairly bright line here between what we do as a hobby, where we're flying within visual line of sight. We know how to see and avoid. As soon as there's a full-scale plane, everybody at the field is yelling full scale. Anybody who's up in the air is bringing their plane down and getting it out of any potential of harm. And then you've got the guys flying the autonomous drones and so forth, some for commercial purposes, some for hobby purposes, some for experimental purposes. And when they're taking those UASs out of visual line of sight, that I think is where you start to run into the problem. And the fact that people can now go and fly these toys anywhere without instruction and so forth, I totally get the need to define some rules around that. The problem is you've essentially taken a tuna net out there and killed some dolphins in the process. How can we come to an accommodation where we're addressing the safety of the airspace without killing our hobby, where we're competing, we're flying well above 400 feet, 867 feet is the top of the aerobatic box. So how do we address that?
Well, again, I think the fact that I'm here answered the invitation of these gentlemen. Have spent quite a bit of time with them. I know Earl Lawrence, again, who was the other part of the new team up there. We talk constantly about this. Besides my aviation background, Earl is a commercial qualified pilot and has his own twin. So I think we understand, but I think I mentioned earlier, it is a fundamental change. I'm not sure that we got this 100% right coming out of the chute. We're not alone in the endeavor, frankly. Mentioned earlier, Congress has great interest, constituents. There's other organizations from a security standpoint that have interest. So we're going to have to walk our way. I'm looking for, I know the FAA is looking for a partnership with groups like yours that has a long tradition, and frankly, it has a long tradition of safe operations and educated operations, right? So being here today hopefully sends that right signal, and we'll continue to partner with you all as we go forward. Yeah. Okay, well, I get it. It wasn't necessarily a satisfying answer. That's the one I have right now.
Hello, sir.
Where are we at?
Over here.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hello. My question is, I understand where you want to use registration to make sure you've got an entry point so everyone can be assured, even if it's just reading a statement on a web page, that they've had some exposure to these basic fundamentals of flight. Instead of coming at it from the end user perspective, why not hit it at the manufacturer's level? Know before you fly seems like a really great program to me and something I've been advocating for a long time. Why not just mandate, if you're going to sell anything called a UAS or a model airplane or whatever here in the United States, that it includes safety information? Seems like that'd be a much smaller, easier target to hit. You talk to DJI, Unique, and a few others. You're already putting this paperwork in the hands of everybody who's flying. Why impact each individual user and all the turmoil that creates? Why not work with the manufacturers? Thank you.
Well, to your point, Know Before You Fly has been out there. It's been a great success, sponsored by AUVSI. DJI is on board. We seek, this may sound counter to everything we've said, not to regulate, certainly not in the industry. We're looking for industry standards and partnering with industry to do the right thing. And frankly, it's it's been very very good, the response that we received from industry. They know that they got to protect the brand. They know that, you know, they got to be out there supporting these safe operations because it impacts the entire community. So I think we already have a good start on that, very good start. That's not compelled, but it's the right thing to do. And again, we're trying to get to industry standards, not sitting here and try to write out everything. And from a future, I think we're trying to get performance-based standards because the technology is changing so quickly that we, you know, it's foolhardy, frankly, to try to legislate the specific answer to the question. We're trying to get into the what, not the how, because we know it's going to be very revolutionary. So I agree with what you're saying. Industry, we've asked, in some cases not even asked, and they've come back and they are in front. I mean, I think Best Buy had some information on the receipts that came out and talked about before you fly. And some of you may or may not know, at least on iPhones, it's not, I don't think, in Android yet, but the Before You Fly app that is, and I know AirMap's working on one, but it's already out there. I pulled that up last night too. It's out of beta, so it's actually out there, and it's a free download if you all want to have a look at it. The idea is it will help you understand where you're operating and any impacts that might be out there, TFRs, airfields, that kind of thing. So, over here.
Right now, we're sitting in Class Charlie airspace for Ontario Airport. What I'm wondering is, did the FAA study how many of the flying fields are way below any Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, any airspace? 400 feet is awful low. Most pilots flying at 400 feet are going to get a letter from the FAA. So why is it that they're shutting down all these fields when they're not even going to touch the airspace that's being used by aircraft?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you saying it's NG airspace? It's uncontrolled airspace, or? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is not an uncommon concern, obviously, and I can't address each airfield specifically. I can take that back, and we can talk offline if you want a little bit more about it. The one I'm pretty intimately with, I'm sorry, is the CIFRA, and I knew that was going to be a concern. That's one I'm involved in. Next, over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, if a 333 approved pilot wanted to fly safely within Class Bravo airspace, what's to prevent a local tower from just arbitrarily saying, no, we don't approve it, as opposed to having some sort of criteria for approving that type of situation?
Well, you know, the word arbitrary is a bit provocative. I've flown a long time, and some tower controllers I thought were pretty arbitrary, but it's within their space. We can't sit here and tell them what to say or not to say, what to approve or not approve. That's what they get paid to do. And if he thinks that there's a conflict or some other aspect that's going to impact on his safe control, then he's going to make that decision. So I don't mean to be dismissive, but I just each individual situation is going to require some other approach. We are working, by the way, within the headquarters very much to bring operations closer in now as we transition from this being a technology concern, safety concern, as we begin to march now out to the right. More of our issues, I think, that need to be worked or addressed is bringing in ATO, what we call ATO, or the ops side of the FAA.
My concern is that they just say they're too busy and they don't even understand the situation or take the time to understand the situation.
Well, and maybe to my point, we're gonna be working harder to do that. And there still is some of that too across obviously every region, every tower. They're not going to be controlled from DC, so they're still going to interpret things as they see based on their workload. So, okay.
Let me echo the thank you for coming down here today and speaking with us. A lot of us.
It's been fun, by the way.
I'm going to make it more fun. A lot of us in the audience, I think our primary concern is the 400-foot altitude limit, We have huge investments in aircraft that normally operate at higher altitudes. And there's a lot of confusion as to the language. I'm hearing rules, I'm hearing guidelines, I'm hearing law. And I also understand, and Rich, maybe you can speak to this, the AMA has asked its members not to register until the end or until the due date in February. So my question is very specifically regarding the 400-foot registration promise. Is that a guideline? Is that a law? What is the FAA's expectations with respect to modeling once we make that registration? And what is the AMA's position on that? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I defer to Rich and Bob on the last part, but I'm probably not in a position to say it's a rule or guideline. Having commanded fighter pilots for a long time, I learned that there was very loose interpretations of all those, and that was usually a punchline. It's more of a guideline, really. But the 400-foot point, as I mentioned before, has come up now, especially in relation to AMA, especially in relation to what we call community-based operations. And so I can't offer a solution on that just yet, but it's been teed up. And so we're going to look very hard at that. Okay. Did you want to answer the piece right now, Rich?
Thank you, Hoot. Yeah, the 400-foot issue is a significant issue, and we've been addressing that going all the way back to 2008 when we sat on the original aviation rulemaking committee. And the 400 feet, to your question, is a guideline. There's nothing in regulation, there's nothing in law that puts you at a regulatory requirement to stay at or below 400 feet. Now, 400 feet is a very good general safety guideline. I mean, if you have no reason to go above 400 feet, we certainly would encourage you not to do so. We also understand that there are modeling operations by their nature go above 400 feet. And we also know that there are modeling operations that are safer by going a little bit above 400 feet, i.e. the one that was mentioned earlier here as far as training. When we train new people, we deliberately take them to a higher altitude so that, one, they have enough room to recover from what they call an unusual attitude in the manned world, and also it becomes a better way of protecting the people on the ground should an aircraft go out of control. One, you have a better chance of recovering it, and two, the people on the ground have a better chance of getting out of the way if it comes down. So there are some very logical reasons why we operate above 400 feet. But in the AMA world, we don't just say at or below 400 feet. That's not the only safety guideline that comes in place there. It starts with where you select to fly. You want to fly at a location where it's safe to do the kind of modeling operations that you intend to do. One, you're required to not interfere with manned aircraft operations. You're required to remain well clear of manned aircraft operations. And you're required to see and avoid at all times, even if that means putting your aircraft into the ground to avoid a manned aircraft. And if you go to document 540D, that's spelled out very clearly. So, and that has served us very, very well for decades. To my knowledge, there's not a single significant manned model aircraft incident on the books, and we certainly want that to continue. Shifting gears a little bit to the issue of not registering. What AMA suggested when it first came out for registration is we suggested our members hold off. Remember, there's a 60-day grace period for existing aircraft to register. The absolute drop-dead deadline is February 19th. What we have been doing in the interim time, as Hoot mentioned, was try to formulate a more automated process where your AMA membership would affect registration. That way that we could take care of that for you on the back end, and you could continue to display your AMA number as your registration number and be assured that you're registered as long as your AMA membership is up to date. And then we are still moving forward with that. Unfortunately, the IT people on both houses, both the FAA side and the AMA side, said we just can't make it happen in the time period allowed. In other words, that February 19th deadline. So I guess at this point, we're going to be no longer suggesting you hold off. Obviously, registration became a requirement on December 21st, and you have to February 19th to affect that registration at least for existing aircraft. and you can do it for free up until, is it the 19th or the 20th of January? The 19th of January, you can do it for free. So registration in the near term is a regulation. And AMA is in a position of saying you need to be compliant with all laws and regulations. So we will continue to work with the FAA on this automated process. We're committed to it. The FAA has said they're committed to it. And unless there's some real barrier to it that we can't overcome, in the extended period of time, you'll see that by joining the AMA, remaining an AMA member, you will affect registration. We'll continue to enjoy flying our model airplanes like we have in the past.
Okay, we're getting near the end. One more? I don't know. It's we're kind of on your clock. Oh, we got some agitated people over here too. Excited, I guess. Agitated is the wrong word. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. I don't consider myself a very smart person, but you mentioned earlier that you had partnered with some of the industries. I'm curious to know, we've talked about regulation and paperwork and a myriad of topics. What's being done to address the technology? You know, a lot of the quads that fly with GPS. What's being done where an engineer could write a flag into a GPS locator that if you're flying in alphabet airspace, that drone doesn't light up? Or if you're flying and punching routinely above 400 feet, that drone is restricted. It seems to me that we're spending a lot of time, and it's very heavy-handed, that a lot of this is coming down on the modeler. Why can't any controller sold in the US have limitations written into the software that help protect the people that we fly around as well as the individual flying the device? When I became a pilot, I used to fly at uncontrolled fields. Didn't need a transponder. Then I needed a transponder. Then it got to the point in the late 80s where my transponder had to be altitude encoding in order for me to safely fly. It's software. Why isn't that something that we're looking at, or are we?
Back to my original point, and that's a good point. We are trying to work with industry and not be directive. To me, that the way you described it might be seen as more heavy-handed. And the technology is evolving so much more quickly than makes sense to try to keep up with. But I would tell you, I've had those conversations. DJI did the original fencing, geofencing capability and the rest. They originally wanted to put it in and did put it into a number of their vehicles, but what they found is, they restricted areas, and then somebody bought their equipment and wanted to use it in that area, but they couldn't because the firmware said you can't fly there. And so we get into these do loops. The FAA is not equipped, resource, or any to keep up with the technology, frankly. We're looking for industry to police itself, if you will, to innovate and establish their best standard practices to meet the needs of the community from a safety standpoint and still innovate. And so there's always second and third order effects, and rather getting that whipsaw. But we're very engaged with industry and happy to hear what they're doing. Most of them, like I said, want to protect their brand. It does them no good to have an accident, especially a public one, and they know that. So they are doing a wonderful job, frankly, of meeting our community's needs from that respect. No, wait, over here. Yeah, okay. All right. He said, go ahead and hang yourself. We coming over here? Next question. I know they really, and then we'll come back to you, sir. By the way, let me get to this last one.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Hey, my concern is my model air where we fly is in the city of Los Angeles, and they have instituted their own rules and regulations now over the city of Los Angeles. Can they legally do that, or is that the FAA's responsibility?
I'm sorry, phrase it one more time.
The city
They're flying
of
out of L.A.
It's City of L.A.
Okay.
And they have already instituted their own rules for flying at 400 feet and needing LOAs and this and that.
Are they flying over people in an urban area?
It's an urban area.
Okay.
We fly on a soccer field. It's industrial on one side, and you'd have to go quite a ways out to be in the urban area. But my point is the FAA is supposed to rule the airways, not the cities and states, correct?
Yes. Well, you touch on another issue that's out there. Might as well address it, and that's the idea of federal preemption. You know, the airspace is sovereign. Since we started flying airplanes, there's been concerns and lots of legal cases brought. Everything from killing chickens for the chicken farmers if you go too low, on and on. And what is, originally it was thought over your house goes up to infinity, and that's not the case. It's gone all the way back to the Supreme Court. Now with UAS and the ability to, have your neighbor in theory looking at you or flying someplace that you don't want them flying, a number of state, local, city ordinances have started coming up. In many cases, I would say, for folks that are trying to support their constituents, but maybe not fully cognizant of the pre-existing law. I think we finally put out, our general counsel from the FAA put out just a reminder to all these states, cities, and others that there is existing law of federal preemption, and that before you come up with something that's local, you reference the federal statutes. It's not to say that in some cases, there are some examples, and I'm sorry they escape me right now, where it might make sense on a local level, but we're seeing everything from don't fly drunk. Well, that's already covered, whether it's UAS or something else. So some of these, and I think a lot of them come back to privacy concerns, and there's a lot of privacy laws already in the book. I think the governor who recently vetoed a number of laws that were, proposed in California, vetoed it and came back and said, I didn't hear his quote, but it was something along the lines, we have plenty of laws in existence now that can cover that. So, yeah, but we have finally put out, in fact, it was welcomed with a lot of folks from the legal side, put out a general statement to the communities reminding them that federal law is already pre-existing, and most of these cases are independent of the vehicle, especially the privacy. It's a lot about the data and other things. So, okay, I'm sorry.
My question has to do with the accountability of the FAA on their reporting of small UAVs and aircraft and kites and so forth. I know this happened not under your watch, but it's been over the last couple of years, and they asked all pilots to report, and they reported everything. And then a lot of the reports that were reported were so badly reviewed by the FAA, yet they produced them as proof that there was a problem. And the one example I've heard several times where helicopters said they came down on a runway with a small quad 15 feet outside of their canopy, which is impossible because of the fact that the rotor wash would blow the thing away before it was ever near it. It's conceivable that a quad could come into a helicopter by coming from above, but these small quads don't do that, yet the FAA reports this information to the news media. What is the position of the FAA?
Okay. First of all, I get your put, having been an old pilot myself. Some of these make you kind of shrug your shoulders. I mean, I said to some folks this morning, I used to fly fighters, and I had trouble finding a fighter many times out there. But the concern, I think, is one of order of magnitude. If we have X number being reported or incidents, maybe not every individual incident can be, correlated and validated. But when you're talking about selling almost double what you have in the field and out in the air now, there's a certain smoke and fire effect there. In other words, we know the trends are heading in the direction of increased numbers are going to create increased problems. Knock on wood, we haven't had any impacts yet. I mean, we've had some minor things, but nothing that's been catastrophic, and we all hope that doesn't happen. But we are now looking at better ways of categorizing and validating the reports as they come in. I get them on my phone pretty routinely. It's like a ding, and it comes out of the ops center. Pilot reported here, pilot reported there. In many cases, it's because we never ask people to tell us if they see a conflict out there, so that's generating some of it. But I would also argue not everybody's trained to estimate distance and the rest of it. So we're working through how to correlate these, how to validate them, and fold them into our safety system. And when you say the FAA is reporting, I don't know that we have. It's come up in testimony, probably in broad terms, but other folks have reported them, I know, and added them to the media. Yeah. Okay, guys, we got about one more question. Two. I see two hands. Can we do that? Over here, sir, if you just yell. Yeah. I'll repeat it.
Why is it you can't incorporate airports by clubs? You don't have to use AMA, but I like to use AMA, and incorporate that into the regulation so the regulations are specialized for model airplane fields.
Okay. So you said we regulate airports.
The
some,
FAA
right?
regulates airports.
Yeah.
Why don't you incorporate model airports into regulations? Because there's a 400-foot rule and the regulations as far as registration. And most of the people here, well, myself, I'll speak for myself, I fly at a model airplane field. And everything that happens at the model airplane, our field is we have our own rules that are governed by the AMA. And so when you're making the regulations, and especially when it comes to the airspace, I would, and I'm seeing a little, you're perplexed by my...
Yeah, well, continue. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
And within the regulations for the 400-foot rules and overall, there's, and I'm trying to incorporate my question. The question I have is my time's
let me try to
up.
jump at least. Community-based operations like the AMA, a club that is kind of self-policing, if you will, and self-regulating, and has been for a long time. In much of our language now, we're trying to say that those, as long as you comply with that, I don't know that we say a member, but if you're a member of a CBO, community-based operation, and follow its safety guidelines, et cetera, then that's satisfactory. So I don't know if that's the same as regulating an airfield. I want to make sure everybody, half the time we're saying we regulate too much, we're in everybody's business. Be careful what you ask for. So if you're saying... Well, and then we're back, we've come full circle. We're back to registration and educating them and trying to pull them into this type of group and these kinds of practices. So I'll talk to you offline with that. One more question, and then I'll be here for a while. Folks, you can come punch me out one at a time. Okay, go ahead.
So the FAA is pointing to model aircraft as aircraft, and they point back to the CIFRA as a demonstration as that. But the CIFRA is not stating that model aircraft is aircraft. It simply states an exemption for model aircraft next to tethered balloons. So they're not quantifying model aircraft as aircraft. Can you speak directly to when the FAA considered model aircraft as aircraft?
Well, that basically came down in the last interpretation through congressional language that that UAS is, and you're making a differentiation, I think, with model fixed wing aircraft, but they're all unmanned.
Because of 336.
It's an aircraft. And so the CIFRA says if you're going to operate in a CIFRA, you got to be able to squawk and talk and do those kind of things that obviously you're not going to be able to comply with. And so it was pulled down. But we're looking for an opportunity or a method or a way to enable that again.
Right, but 336 pointed to no new rules for model aircraft, but yet the FAA says, well, you're aircraft. So when did the FAA consider model aircraft?
No, I think we can talk offline. My understanding is that came out of congressional language, was interpreted that way, yes. But that was one of the methods to get at it. So I'm going to turn this back over. I will be here. First of all, thanks again to Bob and Rich, and to all of you for all your help out there. And I'm looking for partnership in the future for you all that have set such a wonderful example on how to do this safely. So please stay with us and stay on board. Okay.
Mark, thank you. Have a round of applause for Mark. He's a brave man.
I echo what Sam just said. You know, to stand up here for an hour and 10 minutes and be under the gun like Hoot has been takes a man. As far as I'm concerned, I thank you. I'll be in D.C. on Friday. Well, believe it or not, in walking Hoot around trying to illustrate what we're doing, he said, we've got to get together and go fly. And I said, well, I'll be in D.C. on Friday. He says, well, I don't think so. I said, I'll be there Saturday. He said, okay. So that gives you an idea that the gentleman is willing to work with us. Thank you for attending. Thank you again, Hoot. If you have individual questions, Hoot will be here. Thank you.